Good evening, girls and guys. Back for podcast number two, but also podcast number 2 for the Wine to Wales series. So this one is not per se for Wine to Wales. It's about suspension in general, and I thought we'd get the suspension guru himself on the couch to just explain to us a little bit about the basics of suspension. So as you know, Wine to Wales, we're doing this podcast.
Yep.
And it's about getting people ready for the journey. So our aim has always been to take the weekend warrior and get them onto the start line. And everyone seems to focus on the body and not so much the bike. So it's all about the fitness and how strong you can be and how you
feed the engine first.
Yes, and how your ass doesn't hurt for 3 days.
Yes.
But yeah, we tend to forget about the bikes and the bike maintenance and those kind of things. And you guys have one of the best and most successful shops around.
Thank you.
Bike maintenance important, obviously.
Yeah. You want to get through the weekend with not actually having to do any maintenance. And it's very possible. I mean, we've had clients that have got through the Epic and all they did was check the tire pressure and lube the chain.
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
The Epic.
Epic, no maintenance. I think Graham might have replaced a pair of brake pads or 2. That was it. But in that case, it's a fastidious look at maintenance leading up to the event. Yes, that's a hard week, but you start preparing the bike maybe a month or 2 months beforehand, just working your way through it. I mean, don't arrive the week of the race and be like, it's making a squeak, can you quickly fix it?
Sorry,
yeah.
A slight tangent. I must tell you, a mate of mine actually did the Epic a couple of years ago, like 4 years ago.
It's an achievement.
Massive achievement. And he was telling us about the journey that they went on, and they had each bought 2 bikes, not high-end bikes, but just 2 bikes for the training and the Epic, because you know that if you cannot replace frames, there's this whole thing. And about a week before the Epic, the bikes were on the top of the car, and his mother-in-law went out. Donnie, I know you might be watching this. And they went in an underground garage with the bikes on the top and
took them off
took both bikes out a week before the Epic. So there's a whole lot of maintenance that's going to happen there.
It's heartbreak. I feel for people when that happens.
Yeah.
Bike on top of the car is, if you're not used to that, catch you out.
Yeah.
Big time.
So bike maintenance obviously massively important for Wine to Wales.
Just preparation leading up to it. Having the bike serviced up depends on what your maintenance regime is in general.
Yeah.
So it might be 2 weeks before, basic checkup, make sure everything's not creaking, squeaking, braking properly, changing gear as well.
Yeah.
Sealant's topped up. And the bike will be great. It's a 3-day ride.
Well,
essentially, unless it's a wet ride, then
okay,
wet ride. Let's take that off the table because that's just an anomaly all on its own. Doesn't matter how well you prepare.
Yeah. Trust me. 2019, I did it, and it was. It was interesting. When you're going up single track and a river's coming down it changes things a little bit.
It does. But then, if you start looking at the suspension side of things, excuse me, 150 riding hours is your full service for suspension as per your manufacturer.
So
yes,
that
varies a little bit.
Okay, but that's irrespective. Like RockShox, Fox, generally speaking, 150 hours.
Correct. Fox will recommend 125 hours for certain things. There are some manufacturers now who are pushing the limit, who want you to be able to ride for longer without servicing. Like, for instance, Reverb. Some of the newer Reverbs have got exceptionally long service intervals. But as a rule of thumb, 150 riding hours. If you're riding 3 to 4 times a week, it works out to about once a year.
Okay.
So if you're training, start doing the math. You're riding twice a week, every 6 months. Riding 3 times a week, that kind of 4 months. If you're one of those,
it adds up very quickly.
Totally. If you're one of those guys that trains 6 days a week because you've got a big event coming up, you will chew through that time very quickly.
And then I know there was a number being thrown around of 50 hours. So that's for like minor service, lower leg service.
Yeah.
I call it lower leg service. I don't know
It
if
is.
people understand what lower leg service is.
Okay.
Maybe let's start there.
Okay. So the 50-hour is, it is a lubricant, basic lubricant replacement and an inspection.
Okay.
Lower leg services, if you look at a suspension fork, comes in two pieces. Got the top piece and the bottom piece slides in.
Yeah.
You split those two apart. The lower leg is the casting that comes off the bottom that your wheel attaches
with the
into.
branding on it.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's normally a funky color.
Yeah.
So that's got oil in it. It's got foam rings and it's got dust wipers.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other stuff, which is immaterial to what we're talking about right
Yeah.
now. And essentially, you pull it open. You make sure that there's no damage inside. There's no scratching on the stanchions, which is the beautiful Kashima
Yes.
or
Yeah.
black coatings tube sticking out the top.
Mm.
And then you replace the oil inside. Even better, if you want to go one better, is you carefully remove the foam rings, wash it out with degreaser, let it dry, and then fresh oil in the foam rings.
And sorry, for those that are wondering and you want to see a bit of this process, we've actually got a video which we'll link down below, where this man sitting beside me over here actually takes you through that process.
Yeah.
So just so that you can get an idea of what we're talking about, it's actually really well explained. Yeah.
So your 50-hour would be then replacing that bath oil.
Yeah.
Put it all back together, and if everything goes well, no problem. Next 50 hours, repeat process.
Yeah.
Shock, you would split the air can, so the thing
Yeah.
that holds the air for an air shock, off the sort of the damper,
Yes.
you want to call it that,
Yeah.
which is the thing that controls how the bike rides.
Yeah.
And there's a heavy duty or heavyweight oil or grease inside, depending on the manufacturer.
Yeah.
Clean that out. Inspection for various things, bits and pieces, scratches. all that.
Those got wiper seals as well?
It's got a rubber wiper, yep. It's got a wiper on the front, and then it's generally got a quad ring seal. So they each either keep air and oil in or dirt out,
Okay.
depending on where they are. And then there's the bath oil inside, and you replace that. So that's your 50-hour service. It's basically just lubricant. Same for a seat post. So
And that's a big thing. Not a lot of people know that you can service a seat post,
No.
or that you should service a seat post.
that you should. You should service a seat post. Somebody like Line Components, super easy to work on. One would disassemble the post, and it's a grease change. Again, the big thing is inspection.
Yeah.
Every 50 hours, you're inspecting things, so that if there is a scratch or there is a nick,
Or there's a grain of sand in there.
totally.
Yeah. Because I think people forget that mountain biking, we ride on some interesting surfaces.
And we ride on some pretty trick stuff.
Yeah.
Kit.
Yes.
Our bikes, our race cars.
Yes, pretty much. And that's why they cost what they do, unfortunately.
So going back to
yeah.
that grain of sand, if you take a stanchion under a microscope, it's pitted, so it holds 1 micron of oil, and that slides out from under the wiper, lubricates the stanchion as it's sliding in and out. So if you can imagine 1 micron, how small that is, I'll take 1 grain of sand, which you can actually see and feel, and that gets stuck in somewhere, it just damages things.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So normal people riding normal bikes, it's a good idea just to, we'd obviously recommend they come to you guys. You are the best. But
Thank you.
can go to a bike shop who will probably refer them to you anyway. But just to get a good baseline check-in on their suspension, that's not a bad idea. Like maybe a month before the event.
Yes, a month is a good amount of time. If you haven't had the bike, let me rephrase it. If you haven't had the suspension rebuilt during your training cycle, let's say it's 6 months, you will be rebuilding the suspension. You'll be going vastly further than just a lower leg and air can service, just because of the amount of time that you put on the bike.
Yes.
So that'll be more advanced. So that would be getting right down to taking it all apart, checking all the innards and the guts of the thing, replacing damper and lubricant fluids and greases.
Pretty much every seal as well.
Totally. Yeah. And then that basically gets you to a baseline of having a piece of suspension that is about as close to brand new as you
I
could
think
do.
also people need to realize that when you do this, your bike feels significantly different.
Oh, yeah.
So
The performance gains are huge.
it's unbelievable. So I've been through a bit of a journey with you guys of late. I had a creak on my Fox 38, and it turned out it was a CSU. And that's a story for another day. But when the fork was taken apart, the oil that is supposed to be beautifully silky, smooth, and luscious, I don't know how else to describe it, was very much muddy and milky and everything else. And it just goes because the type of riding we do, the environment, the amount of riding we do, and I couldn't figure out because I was like, oh, the suspension feels very harsh, and you start playing with dials and it gets worse, and it just turned out it needed a service.
Yeah.
And the new oil went in. We went back to Jonkershoek, and it literally felt like I was riding on a magic carpet.
Yeah. Just because you got better lubricating properties within the oil.
100%. And that was just an oil change.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing I could we can both probably recommend is before you start your training regime, you've got a good couple of months to wind to Wales now. Maybe do that 50-hour service now.
Yeah.
Get an understanding of what's happening with your suspension, and then train with something that you know works.
Yes.
So
that also set the baseline.
Yes.
You'll see this coming week, you'll see a lot of very strange, dusty, old bikes that have just been pulled out of the garage or pulled out of the storeroom to do the cycle tour. There's no baseline for that bike.
Yeah.
It might have been perfect at the last race, which is a year ago, bearing in mind that rubber degrades over the course of a year because of fossil fuels and stuff, air, oxygen. That bike could also have been damaged then. You don't know what the baseline is.
And now it's been left for a year.
Totally. So if you're going to do a performance event, set the baseline first. Have it checked out. Even if nothing more, the bike shop, whoever it is, inspects the bike and gives you a list.
Yeah.
These are the things that you need to do. If you think back and you're like, you know what, I can't actually remember if or when when last I serviced my suspension, then it's overdue.
Just do it.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is, like, I went into Stoke in the beginning of the week. It's time for our yearly service or tear down now. Melissa's bike went in, and Drew was actually he's got a great mind or brain, and he could walk up to it and give me an idea of what's wrong with it on the spot so we can get a ballpark figure. Because you can kind of judge by looking at a bike and by checking certain things.
Generally.
And
we know
I'm not saying
bikes.
every time, but yes, yeah.
We know your bikes.
Yeah.
We know the greater customers that come to us regularly.
Yeah.
We know their bikes. We know more or less their riding habits, and the same will be said for any other bike shop and their regular clients.
Yeah.
So you'll know where that bike is more or less in the training cycle, or you'll squish it, feel it, pedal it, and you'll be like, okay, you can surmise this is more or less what needs to happen.
But I think the word you use there is regular. Totally. It's the non-regular customers or those that are doing wine to Wales for the first time, because remember, we're trying to pitch this at the Weekend Warrior.
Totally.
And the Weekend Warrior is not necessarily always going to be a regular.
You don't know what that person's baseline is.
Yeah.
They might be walking into the shop with a brand new bike that they've just bought off another shop and wanted to come see what the suspension thing was all about. You might have somebody who's walking in with what they classify as a brand new bike, but they bought a second hand. Then you don't know what the baseline is of that bike.
Yeah.
Or you get a guy that's got a bike who's had it for the last 10, 15 years, services it regularly, can give you a good history or not.
Yes.
So there's a multitude of things.
So I think that's a good summary before we move on to suspension. Bike maintenance is important, and it's very important when you're doing an event like this. Someone was asking me the other day, and we were chatting at work, and they were going, so how much does your bike cost? And I think people tend to forget that we ride those bikes down really steep rocky mountains, and we kind of put our lives not in the hands of the bike, it's in our hands. But I mean, the bike facilitates that journey down the mountain, and we put that bike through a serious amount of stress.
We do. There's a wonderful podcast that's just released. It's an account called Gypsy Tales.
Yes. Yeah.
And they've just interviewed Reece Wilson, and he talks a lot about the speed that they ride at a World Cup level, and how much stress the bike goes through.
Yeah.
And that's just a different level of ride altogether. Yes. But the bikes that we're on, as I said, are sports cars. They are pretty close to being at the top pinnacle of performance.
Yeah.
There's not many sports where you can go out and buy a piece of kit that is pretty much what a professional would be riding.
Yes.
Apart from the sneaky tweaks that they do.
Yeah.
Like it's quite special.
Yeah.
But most of those bikes do need a little bit of love over time.
Yeah.
A lot of them do get that love to keep them in top shape, but unfortunately, some of them.
Yes, and yeah. So before we move on to suspension again, just remember, take that bike in sooner than later. Get it checked, and know that you're going to be safe out there.
Totally,
because it's safety that is the name of the game.
It is a safety thing.
Yeah,
you catch any gremlins that might rear their heads early on. You might catch something that has a crack, like a cracked rim or.
A loose brake bolt, a caliper bolt.
Cracked handlebar is something we've seen before, and rather catch it in the shop than out on the trail.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
But also, one more thing is if you do it incrementally, so you keep an eye on it, you don't get those massive bills when you walk in. And there's a lot of things that have compounded over time.
Yeah,
rather chip away at it a little bit. We often say to customers, if you've got a full sus bike, expect to pay between 5,000 and 7,000 Rand a year on service items. But if you extrapolate it down to a cost per month or per week or per day, quite a small amount if you chip away at it.
Yeah. And then if you don't, there's a big bill coming your way.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
We're riding top of the line kit, most of us. So,
fair enough. Back to suspension though.
Hit me.
So, I'm a new weekend warrior.
Yes.
I get a bike. It's come back from the bike shop now. Mm-hmm. And I look at it and I've got no clue of how to set up my suspension, be it hardtail or softtail. I mean, it's pretty much the same thing other than a rear shock at the back. What is the first thing that I do to get a baseline on my suspension?
First thing to do is to check the sag. So when you climb on the bike, if you carry a lot of kit with you, preferably have it on you. You climb on the bike in your riding gear, and it's the amount that the suspension will sink into its stroke, into its travel. And it'll be a percentage. So let's use an easy one, 100 millimeters. Cross country, 20 to 25% of the travel. So that's 20 to 25 mils. And you would apply that percentage to the fork and the shock.
Yeah.
Shock's obviously a lot shorter. Need to do a bit of math.
Yeah.
But cross-country bike, you're looking at around 25%.
Front and rear?
Front and rear.
Yeah.
When you start altering those percentages, you're at the point where you're very much further down the line than what we're talking about now.
Okay.
You understand what you're trying to achieve in terms of more or less sag.
Yeah.
A long travel bike, let's a trail bike.
Yeah.
If it's a short trail bike, around 25%.
Yeah.
To 30. Starting again.
So that's between 100 and 120 mil.
Yeah, I'd say over 120 mil.
Over, okay.
Yeah. Cool. Anything up to about 120, say 25%.
Okay.
Anything over 120 mil to around, let's call it 180 mils of travel.
Yep.
So trail bike, enduro bike, 30%, 35% if you're wanting to get things a bit more squishy for a reason. And then a downhill bike, most of the guys that are racing downhill
about 40.
No, they'll probably be running a lot less sometimes than 30% because of they wanting the thing to stay propped up.
Okay.
Or hitting something hard, so they don't want to bottom out.
Yeah.
But it'll be very much a fine-tuned exercise between both ends.
Yeah.
As opposed to a blanket setting.
Yes, yeah. So we say, if we look at weekend warriors, wine to wells, we're looking at XC bikes, short travel trail bikes, we're looking at 25%.
Yeah, let's use that as a nice figure to work with. And generally it's air suspension. Most bikes are air suspension. So you'd be adjusting the air pressure.
Yeah.
So you need a shock pump, you'd need a short ruler, and maybe a mate to kind of help you measure things.
Yeah.
Is
there any, do you have to sit on it, get off, sit on it, get off?
A lot.
A lot. Yeah. Okay.
While you get it right.
Okay.
But essentially, when you climb on, if you climb on the bike and if you have got a dropper post, have it fully extended, and you sit on the seat, and that's when you'd measure the shock.
Just get off gently so that you don't obviously get the suspension to wiggle. Yeah.
There'll be a little O-ring on the shock, and there'll be an O-ring on the fork. That you slide that up until it hits the wiper seal.
Yeah.
And then when you sit down on it or you stand on the pedals, that'll depress and it'll give you a reading. With the fork, you want to be standing on the pedals evenly on the bike. Don't over accentuate by hanging off the back or pushing on the front.
Yes. Yeah.
Just stand up evenly as if you were freewheeling down the pathway.
Yeah.
And then you take your measurement.
Also, if you don't have O-rings on your bikes,
you need a suspension
then
service.
you need a suspension service because they should have O-rings.
Yes, they should.
They
perish over time. They crack in the sunlight. They generally last about a year, 18 months.
Yeah.
So if the thing's fallen off,
time to service.
First visit.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got the sag set now. You've got.
It's a baseline. Let's just clarify that before.
Okay.
This gets you set up at a baseline.
Yes.
Yes, you can depart. You can depart from it.
Okay.
But it gives you a starting point.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to keep it as simple as we can now, obviously, for the weekend warrior. So you've set your sag. You now have. We're not going to go into high speed and low speed and all of those funny things.
Compression.
But you've got a dial on the top of your fork and you've got a dial on the bottom. So you've got a blue one on top and a red one at the bottom. Generally speaking. And then you have a blue dial and a red dial on your shock should you have a soft tail.
Yeah.
What are the red and the blue dials?
Okay. So if we take a fork, the dial on the top is generally a compression setting. Fox and Rock shocks will generally have their compression settings at the top. There's some manufacturers that will move things around a bit. It's generally a compression on the top and rebound on the bottom. So now that you have and the shock would be generally a red ring, which is your rebound setting, and the compression is set in a shock. It's preset, but you would have a platform or lockout lever.
Yes,
and that affects different modes.
Yeah. So on most of the cross country bikes, I think it's lockout, trail or descend or whatever it is. There's 3 settings or 2 settings, and you can kind of switch that to whatever you're doing.
Loosely speaking, yes.
Yes.
We try not to use the term lockout at Stoke because it's misunderstood.
Okay.
Yes, there are some suspension platforms that lock out firm. They have a very specific role and job for racing bikes.
Yes.
Generally, 90% of all riders probably don't need a full lockout.
Yes.
They would need a platform. Something to stop it bombing around. Suspension on most bikes nowadays is so good you almost don't need it.
I don't think Melissa and I have never used our firmer settings on our shocks.
Yeah. It will make quite a big difference if you're chasing time or if you're a performance orientated person, because you will notice energy loss, suspension moving around as you're climbing or sprinting.
But it's generally for climbing or flatter. It's not really for descending. Descending, you'd have it unlocked.
No, you want the best performance for descending as much as you can. It will be for when you're putting a lot of power through the pedals, climbing, or sprinting. But strange enough, on the flats, or if you're traveling at high speed, best to actually have it open. Let the suspension do its business.
Thing.
Gives you more traction, more comfort.
And it's safer.
And you don't get as tired because your body doesn't have all that vibration going through.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
So let's go back to, so what does the top dial do? Compression.
Magic. Compression. Okay. So compression.
I mean, just layman's terms there. Which
compression controls how the suspension squishes into its stroke.
Yeah.
Very simple. Either hard or soft, and it either gives you support or no support.
Okay.
That's the very basic terms.
Okay.
You look at rebound on the bottom, it's how the suspension extends from when it's fully squished to how it returns to how it looks when it's standing beautifully in your bedroom.
Yeah.
And that.
And we all know you guys have your bike sleeping in your bedroom.
Bikes don't sleep in garages. They sleep in the lounge or the bedroom. But that will control speed, how fast it comes back.
Yeah.
And the finer nuances of that speed, either compression or rebound, if you make them too fast or too slow, they do some weird things.
Yeah.
You want to find a middle ground.
And they kind of play together.
They do. And air, or your spring rate.
Yes.
The three as a triangle. It'll be spring, compression, rebound. As you affect one, it will affect the other.
Yes. Yeah.
So more air means it's a harder spring, which means it's going to be more bouncy. So you want to slow it down. You add rebound, or you slow the rebound down.
Yeah.
So that's a nice, easy one to compare.
Yeah.
Compression starts getting a bit more tricky because you're starting to look at performance gains. Like, is it going to help support me on a big jump, but give me suppleness on a rough road? And that's when, as you were saying, the high and low speed compression, that's when you start looking at that. And I think most of the riders that you are trying to explain this to would probably have just a single compression setting.
Yeah.
So it would give them, it would firm up the suspension to a platform, or it would have some kind of a switch, a lockout switch on it.
Yeah.
So it would give you a very firm platform for performance gains.
Yeah. So essentially, you're either going to have it firm for fire roady stuff?
No, I would have it open for fire roady stuff.
Okay.
You want comfort.
Okay.
Because hopefully you are going at warp speed, chasing the front of the bunch, and you want as much grip and performance as you
So
can
when
get.
do you lock it out? Or
For me
do you
personally,
ever lock
if
it
I
out?
was racing cross country, I would probably primarily use it for ascending. So take climbs where it's a long slog and you want to save as much energy as possible. Or if I was in the scenario where I'd be in a sprint.
Okay.
You want to put as much energy through the bike onto the ground to get it to go as fast as you can. The misnomer is that you need to lock out your suspension when you ride on the tar.
But that was my misconception up until a little while ago.
It's okay. So let's take a step back. That would be let's call it an energy saving method.
Okay.
Because the bike is not moving around. The road bikes, they don't have suspension. You want to put all the energy into the bike to go forwards. Same principle would be applied. However, suspension doesn't like to sit static. Doesn't like to travel this much.
Yes.
Likes to travel lots, splash the oil around.
Yes.
Lots of lubrication. Things don't dry out. Things don't get scratched.
Yeah.
So the worst thing for suspension is to ride it locked out for long periods of time. And even worse is if it's not serviced. And it's wearing something out, it's wearing it out here.
Yeah.
Not wearing it out there.
In the full stroke, yeah.
Yeah.
And
you won't notice that until you take it apart.
And then that brings us back to the servicing.
Yep.
That's crazy. Okay, so we've set our sag. Is there a baseline starting point for rebound and compression?
Yeah, rebound is a little bit easier to understand and to kind of play with. So you've set your sag, you got your pressure right. That's your spring.
Yeah.
So now you want to slow it down. So you would then add or slow down the rebound. You don't want it to be so slow that it struggles to come back.
Yeah.
And you don't want it to be a pogo stick where it bounces. So some of the older suspension used to make a bit of a slurping sound when you adjust the rebound, and you could get an idea of how slow is too slow.
Yeah.
But essentially, when you press down on the suspension unit, you want to see it react, but it must react and then just slow down a touch.
Okay.
It's something that if you're looking for it regularly, you will see it. It's a bit tricky to do as a new person to mountain biking. Best would be to pop into a shop and let them help you set it up, or to play with it on the trail. So you do a thing called bracketing.
Yes.
Whereby you would ride up and down a piece of trail and you would do adjustments, a click at a time, to see what it does.
Yeah. And I think, again, we'll put a video down below, but Geordie from Fox.
Fantastic videos.
I mean, unbelievable videos where he explains bracketing and how to get the best out of your suspension as a weekend warrior, everyday rider.
Correct.
So we'll link that down below. But yeah, so...
What you can do is if you're a bit hesitant or nervous about it, set your air pressure, set your rebound to the middle. So let's say it's 8 clicks from the full range.
Yes.
So you would set it to 4. How does that feel? Does it feel too fast or bouncy in your hands?
Yeah.
Your hands get tired after a ride. If that's the case, slow it down, because that means it's coming back at you too fast. Does it feel squishy, mushy, or it feels like it's boggy? So you go through a corner or a berm
and it sucks you in.
It feels like the front end just wants to wallow in.
Yeah.
Too slow. It's not reacting fast enough.
Yeah.
And it'll start to do some very strange things that will make you think it's actually a compression circuit that's doing it.
I think I might have learned this from you, but with rebound, if you press into it and you're standing next to the bike, if it comes back at you and the front wheel lifts off the ground, it's too fast. You want it to come back at you, but not lift off the ground.
Correct. Correct. And then the similar thing with the shock, because the pressures in a shock are a lot higher. That bounce that you're talking about now, you'll see it more prevalent with a shock, just because you're putting, say, 150 psi in a shock as opposed to maybe 70.
Yeah. Jeez, I must be fat if mine's sitting at 250.
You're not fat. You're just tall.
Thank you. But yeah, so same thing. Press on the seat. See how quickly the suspension comes back at you.
You don't want that rear end to be boggy and slow. And similarly, you don't want it to pop.
Yeah.
Another way to check if you are an adept rider and you're comfortable with jumping things, and it doesn't need to be much, it would be to take a jump at the Kai or Kontemannskloof or Mirandal or wherever you ride.
Yeah.
If the suspension feels nice and even, takeoff and landing, your rebound settings are probably pretty good.
Yeah.
If the back end kicks you over a jump, you probably find the rebound's too fast. It's going to push you over the front, which is unideal because you go over the bars.
Yeah.
On the fork, landing, if the bike lands and it struggles to come back and
it's too slow.
Feels wobbly and it's not reactive, too slow. Similarly, if you land and it comes back at you, or the front end feels like it wants to skit out in a direction, too fast. Its reaction time is too quick.
Okay, so that's rebound. So rebound is actually quite, if you think about it, it's actually quite easy.
It is, and
easier to understand.
Easier to understand. It's also easier to play with.
Yeah.
Its range is generally a bit more concise, and it's very visual and visceral.
Yeah. We've got Siri listening to us here.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So what I would then say is maybe set it in the middle and then, like you say, brackets.
1 or 2 clicks either way, and just give it a try.
Yeah. Does one click make a difference?
Yes. You may not feel it because maybe you're running a very high pressure, but every little click will make a difference.
Okay.
Similarly, it will not make any difference if the oil that's in your fork is water and is not in good shape, because then it's not going to react the way it should through a circuit.
Yeah. So, and essentially, it's an oil circuit that you either closing or opening, which then gives you a certain feeling.
Yeah. It's either going through a shim stack, which look like a whole bunch of washers, very thin, or it's going through a port and shims, or it's just going through ports. Port as a hole.
Yeah.
And you would increase or decrease the size of the hole as a hose pipe. Stick your finger over the end of a running hose pipe.
Yes.
bigger the hole, the more fluid's going to flow
Yes,
through.
yeah.
Same principle. Exactly the same principle.
Ah, amazing.
Yeah.
So there we go. So now we've got, out of the triangle, we've got air sorted out, which is your sag. We've got rebound discussed.
Yep.
And then compression, the one that's the interesting one to talk about.
So compression is performance. Let's go back to platform or lockout. That's generally your compression circuit. If it's in a locked or a lockout scenario, so something that goes very firm, you're basically restricting oil flow entirely so that you compress on it. If you now start adjusting that, so you control the flow of the oil through the suspension shim stack or your compression circuit, it'll be like it can accept a very small bump sensitively. That gives you comfort. Yeah. And then when you hit a big bump, it pushes the oil through a slightly different path. Yeah. But that gives you support, so you don't bottom out on the jump.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's when you start getting into the compression, high and low speed compression settings. For the average person, you will generally have a single dial on the top. Yeah. And you would be closing off a tap. Yeah. You'd be dealing with rebound just in the opposite way. Okay. Only this time it's going to give you support. So you'll be able to put pressure on the fork. Yeah. And it'll give you a difference in the sensitivity setting. Yeah. So it'll either be uncomfortable to ride on rocky terrain because it's just too harsh.
Yeah, and that's in
or
the...
you want to open it up. Yeah. And don't be scared to play with that as you ride. It's pointless riding, chasing the pack down a gravel road and the front end feels like you're riding over a bunch of rocks because the compression is still locked out. Yeah. Open it up. Let it roll freely.
So that's just I'd say more so than rebound, that's kind of like sit and forget kind of thing. Not sit and forget, but I mean, in the greater scheme of things, if you're a weekend warrior, you're going to kind of set it where you're comfortable on the bike and you're going to kind of leave it. Where compression, the top dial, the blue dial, you can kind of play with it and see what works for you in different scenarios.
You can often adjust on the fly. So the dial is generally quite big. It's really accessible to get to. So you can adjust as you're riding. This dirt road or this single track, it's a little bit more tricky, but a dirt road, like if you're traveling through a liaison section, is a bit rough. Open the compression circuit up. Let it be a bit more active. You know that you're coming into the sprint to the finish and you're sitting
lock it out
and you're sitting in a good position and you've got a couple of O's in front of you. Close that thing off. It doesn't bob around. You get as much power into the bike as possible.
That's amazing. So for the average person, going downhill, you want it open. You want it to be as supple and as responsive and...
Loosely speaking, yes.
Yes.
You want it as active as possible.
I'm learning the right words here tonight.
You want it as active as possible, but if you're in a race setting, you want it to do certain things. You want the two circuits to do certain things. Yeah.
And this goes kind of...
very deep hole if you want to go there.
Yes, yeah. And again, tonight's not that kind of chat. I mean, we can always... I think it would be great to have you back and we can kind of deep dive in. Because, I love the technical aspect of things. Can't do anything technically because I just take it to Savage to have a look at it.
You're starting to understand.
I'm starting to get it a little bit,
and you're also feeling confident enough to make changes on the trail and know
he says this, but it was... I mean, this was me. Go in and he goes... when you're out on the trail, this one lever only changed that.
Oh, that's how we started. We're getting better.
So yeah, I think that gives everyone a really good understanding of what the two dials do. Obviously, some of the high-end bikes give you instead of just compression, there's low and high speed, and at the bottom, instead of rebound, there's low and high speed. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to get into that. Generally, the weekend warrior is not going to be running a factory suspension or something like that. And if you do have factory suspension and you're not sure of how to get that dialed, please go visit this man.
With pleasure.
And they'll talk you through or get you onto a baseline that you can then start playing and bracketing with.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to try test things out.
Yes. You'll find out very quickly what does and doesn't work.
Correct. And if you are not sure at to what point you got to, so it feels weird, go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
So whether that was everything halfway, everything open, start again, and then just keep adding a click at a time. Most people will just go buck wild and they'll do lots of clicks and then they don't quite know where they are and they don't know why it's doing this weird thing. If you're methodical and you have a little bit of time, and granted we live in a modern lifestyle, time is tricky for a lot of riders. If you've got just spend a little bit of time on setting it up, or come and see us or a bike shop that enjoys setting up suspension, run you through the basics, spend 30 minutes in a beer, sitting, chatting about it, get a feel for it, ride it up and down the road, or if they've got a little track outside, ride it around the track, get an idea of what it feels like. And even if you've got that extra bit of time, ask them to set it very weird. Like make it super slow, super fast.
Just so that you can get an understanding.
This is what it must not be like.
Yes. Is it worth downloading the manual and using a suspension manufacturer's baseline settings for your weights?
If this was 10 years ago, I'd say no.
Okay.
But just about every single manufacturer has now updated most of their charts on their websites, on their suspension units, and they're very, very good.
Okay, well, that's quite handy to know.
But bear in mind, there are certain nuances between manufacturers that are not the same. And let's use Fox as an example. The way they set up forks, or especially the longer travel forks, is a lot less sag than 30%.
Really?
Yeah. They're aiming at between 15 and 20. But with that comes a whole different set of settings for compression and rebound. Because you're now affecting not only the spring rate, which is harder, which gives you a lot more support. You're now affecting how the oil flows as well, because it's a harder spring. So you want to make it supple in certain when it's doing certain things. So that won't translate to another manufacturer. Just because that's not what they adopt.
No,
you just got to be careful, or just be aware of that. Read, if you've got, say, 3 different forks, you're lucky to have 3 different forks or access to 3 different forks. Read up on the basic stuff from the manufacturer, and you'll see where the subtle nuances are between them and where they are actually adopting attitude.
Or go see these guys. And they have I don't know if it's publicly available, but they've got some good beer. So thank you for that. That explains things so nicely.
It can be a lot to take on if you knew, even if you've been riding bikes for many, many years. Suspension has come so far in the last 20 years, come so far in the last 10 years, that even for some riders, we've have riders that have been riding since the late 80s, and they come in and they've got a new bike, and often the guy will be like, I don't understand the new stuff. There's so many settings. Like the previous bike
I felt like that.
Simple.
It was I was used to, like, you buy a Scott and it's got like trail, descend, fire road, and off you go. And I'm running a Fox 38 factory now, and I'm like, I get night sweats just thinking about.
You're dealing with 6 things: your air spring and the token that affects the air spring, 2 compression and 2 rebound.
It's a lot to take in. But I think I've got it dialed to a point now where I just mess with the low speed stuff because I'm not fast enough to mess with the high speed stuff. But look, thank you for that. I think this will put. This is either going to do 2 things for people. It's going to make you realize that you need to service your suspension and make you freak out a little bit. Or the opposite side of it's going to make you go, hey, this is actually not that scary. Let me have a play.
I'm hoping it's the latter. There probably will be a couple of people who would think, oh, geez, I need to service my stuff. But unless there's actual damage, like, it's generally service stuff is regular maintenance. And then when you want to get into more the performance side of things, then you start asking questions. More advanced.
And I also don't think that Wine to Wales is overly technical. So it's essentially 3 long trail rides 3 days in a row.
It's a fantastic ride.
It's a beautiful, beautiful event. And I think we need to stress that out. For those people thinking of doing it, you're riding some of the best trails that we generally don't have access to.
Yeah.
You're riding some of the most scenic trails that you will never see views like that anywhere in your life ever again. And you're getting to ride it with a bunch of people who are like-minded. And you're just out there and you're having the most amount of cheers and fun.
Fantastic event. I've done it. I've been lucky enough to do it a couple of times. And every single time was unique. And every single time was special in its own right.
Yeah.
Except for sleeping in a tent.
Yes.
It gets a bit hard.
As a tall person, even more so.
So it's only 3 days worth.
Yes.
But the beers are generally cold. The food's good.
Yeah.
The trails are great. And
the stories that you come out with at the end of it are it's legendary, and you're gonna have the best time.
Yeah.
But now you should feel a little bit better with regards to bike maintenance and to get an idea of bike maintenance, and then suspension, which should make riding on your bike for 3 days a hell of a lot more comfortable. Comfort
is key, especially when it's a long time in the saddle. You want to be able to not walk away with like sore, tingly hands or a seat post that's failed and now it's too low and you get cramps in your legs. So comfort is key for those things, and then the fitness. But if you've trained for the event, you'll be fine.
That's half the battle won.
Yeah, no problem.
We're also going to get Irma down. Irma's going to be chatting to us just around bike fit. So we're starting to prepare physically. We spoke to Rob about that. We're chatting suspension and bike maintenance, and then bike fit. We're going to speak to some people about nutrition. So we're slowly but surely building the complete cyclist for Wine to Wales.
Yeah, and all of those things just lead to a more enjoyable ride.
100%. Preparation is key.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not just about physical preparation, it's about bike preparation, as you guys have heard tonight.
There's a little bit of bike prep that goes
with it. Yeah.
I've seen some pretty trick bikes at races before. We've seen the complete opposite as well.
Yes. We are super keen to do Wine to Wales and take everyone along on the journey. But we're doing it in the e-bike category.
That's okay.
And we are going to do it in turbo. And we are going to get batteries from SJ and leave it at a halfway point. And we are just going to have the biggest jaw, putting the cameras on both of us. And we're just going to show people what it's all about. Yeah. So that's the plan.
I think everybody that I've chatted to that has done it on an e-bike has thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Just because you can cover the ground quite quickly. You're obviously not as fatigued at the end. Yeah. So enjoying the second day and the third day is a lot easier. But you can take that extra sandwich with. You can take an extra camera with.
You can stop for a little bit longer.
Smell the roses.
Yeah.
You can completely just take your time for the day and just thoroughly immerse yourself in that experience. Stop at the water points.
That's exactly what we plan on doing. It's
a glass of wine
so
at Idiom Farm if they still go through there.
Yes, yeah. So exciting times. But thank you so much for coming on tonight. Thank you for allowing us the ability to pick your brain a little bit.
There's too much in here.
No, but that's cool.
We're
going to get you back. And then we're also going to put Savage and Drew's details down, not their personal numbers, but the shop number down below. And if you guys are struggling, or even if you're not struggling and you just want to talk a bit of crap and, just talk suspension and geek out a little bit.
We are bike geeks.
These are two of the biggest bike geeks you'll ever meet, but geeks in such a cool way. They're not the calculator in the top pocket kind of geeks.
Do a bike setup and there's a ruler and a calculator.
Oh, fair enough. Look, I mean, if you give it to Drew, there's going to be a hammer ththrown in as well.
That's right. He fixes anything. So that's okay.
Yes, our own Jeremy Clarkson. We're going to have all the details down below. But if you have any questions, pop it in the comments below. We'll make sure that these guys get to see it. And let's have a conversation around suspension and just realize that it's not all voodoo and myths and all magical unicorns and stuff, but it's something that the average person can kind of wrap their head around at the end of the day.
The black magic comes in when things kind of go a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
But the setup and comfort, and with that comes confidence, and with that comes speed. That becomes a better rider. It just all incrementally leads to average Joe being a better mountain biker.
There we go.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for joining.
Cheers.
Till the next one. Bye.